Stop scrolling for just a moment, because this story is not entertainment. It is a mirror that will show you something you didn't want to see, and once you hear it, you will never forget it again. There was an old man who lived in a small, lonely apartment. His days were quiet, his nights even quieter, filled with silence. But he carried a secret ritual that no one around him understood. Every single evening, when the clock struck 7, he sat down. He reached for his old landline phone, yellowed with age and dust, and he dialed the exact same number without hesitation. The phone rang once, twice, sometimes 3 or 4 times. No one picked up. No one ever said a word on the other side. Still, the old man stayed there, breathing deeply, listening. To the neighbors, it looked strange and maybe even disturbing. Why call the same number if nobody ever answers? They whispered, but they didn't know the truth hiding inside those calls. That phone number belonged to his late wife, Mary, now gone. 3 years had passed since death had taken her from him. But for the old man, love had not ended with her last breath. Before she passed, Mary recorded a simple voicemail greeting. "Hi, you've reached Mary. Please leave a message after the beep." To anyone else, it was nothing. To him, it was everything. So every night, he dialed the number just to hear that voice. He never left a message, never spoke into the machine. He only listened, with tears gathering and hands trembling. The sound of her voice gave him something medicine couldn't give. It gave him a reason to wake up the next morning again. It gave him the illusion that she was still here, waiting. One curious young neighbor finally decided to ask about it. "Sir, why do you call that same number every single day?" The old man smiled faintly, but his eyes filled with water. He whispered, "Because that voice is all I have left of her. Those few seconds mean more to me than the whole world. Without them, my nights would drown completely in silence." The young neighbor was struck by the depth of the confession. He realized it wasn't madness, it was devotion, raw and pure, the kind of love that refuses to die, even after death. But one stormy evening, everything changed without warning. The old man dialed the familiar number, his hand shaking, and this time he didn't hear her voice. Instead, a cold robotic message played. "This number is no longer in service." The words pierced him like a knife, cutting through his heart. The voice he had clung to was gone, erased forever. He dropped the phone and stared into the emptiness of the room. For the first time, the silence around him was unbearable. It felt like losing her all over again, but even worse. He tried again and again, redialing in desperation and fear. But every attempt ended with the same cruel robotic tone. The line that once carried her echo was now completely dead. The old man sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. His ritual, his lifeline, had been ripped away without warning. It felt as though the universe had stolen her twice. He pressed his forehead against the cold receiver, trembling inside. Memories of her laughter and touch flooded back into him. But the silence in his ear was heavier than any memory. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat by the phone in darkness. The ticking of the clock felt louder than thunder in his chest. Every second reminded him that her voice was truly gone. The next day, the young neighbor noticed the old man's eyes. They were red, swollen, and filled with unspeakable emptiness. He asked carefully, "Did something happen to your phone calls?" The old man nodded slowly, unable to hold back the tears. They disconnected her number. I can never hear her again. It was a confession heavier than 1,000 silent nights. The neighbor felt his heart crack open for the old man. He realized no one should face such grief completely alone. So, he came up with an idea that might bring comfort. He searched online for old recordings, old answering machines. Finally, he found a way to restore and save voice messages. Maybe, just maybe, he could bring the greeting back to life. Late at night, the neighbor worked tirelessly on his computer. He dialed into old systems, traced files, dug through archives. It was like chasing a ghost through wires and signals. After hours of effort, something miraculous happened. A small audio file popped up, labeled with her name, Mary. The neighbor's hands shook as he pressed play. "Hi, you've reached Mary. Please leave a message after the beep." Her voice filled the room, warm and gentle, as if alive again. Tears rolled down the neighbor's face in quiet disbelief. The next morning, he knocked on the old man's door gently. When the old man opened, his face looked hollow and fragile. The neighbor said, "I have something to show you." He held out a small device with trembling hands. With one press, Mary's voice echoed softly into the room. The old man collapsed into tears, clutching the device tightly. It was as if she had returned, just for a fleeting moment. Not in flesh, but in sound, in memory, in love. The old man whispered, "Thank you. You gave her back to me." From that day on, the device became his treasure. Every evening, instead of dialing, he pressed play, and her voice filled the silence once more. The neighbor visited often, making sure he wasn't alone. They shared tea, stories, and sometimes just quiet moments. Grief was still there, but it was no longer unbearable. The old man realized something important in those days. Love doesn't vanish, even when voices fade into nothingness. It finds ways to survive, through people, through kindness, through memory. One evening, as the sun set in orange and red, he smiled. He pressed play, listened to Mary, and felt peace inside. For the first time, he didn't cry after hearing her. Instead, he closed his eyes and whispered to the recording, "Mary, thank you for loving me all these years. I'll carry your voice in my heart until my last breath." Weeks passed, and the old man grew weaker with time. His body aged quickly, but his spirit carried calmness, because he knew he wasn't truly alone anymore. One morning, the neighbor knocked but got no answer. He entered carefully and found the old man resting. The device was still playing Mary's voice on repeat. The old man had passed peacefully in his sleep. His face carried no sorrow, only quiet relief, as if he had finally reunited with her at last. The neighbor cried, but he also smiled through tears. He realized the love between them had defeated death. It lived on, in memory, in story, in sound. At the funeral, people whispered about the strange phone calls, but the neighbor shared the truth with everyone present. It wasn't madness, it was devotion deeper than words. Soon, the story spread far beyond their small community. People heard about the man who called a silent phone, and they felt their own hearts ache and awaken, because everyone has someone they wish they could call again, someone whose voice still echoes in their memory, someone whose silence still hurts after all this time. The old man's story became a reminder for everyone. Don't wait to tell people how much they mean to you. One day, the phone will ring, but they won't answer. His silent phone was no longer a symbol of loss. It became a lesson, carved deeply into those who listened. A lesson about time, love, and the weight of memory. The neighbor kept the device with Mary's voice safe. He would sometimes press play, not for himself, but for others, to remind them of the fragile beauty of connection. And every time her voice filled the room again, he could almost see the old man smiling beside her. Together, even in silence, they taught the world about love. Love that doesn't end when life does. Love that survives even when voices fade. Love that speaks louder than silence itself. People began recording and saving the voices of loved ones. They understood now that a voice is more than sound. It is memory, comfort, and presence in the darkest nights. The story reached strangers across oceans and cultures. Yet no matter where they lived, it touched them the same, because grief and love are languages everyone understands. The silent phone had once been a symbol of pain, but through kindness, it transformed into a beacon of hope, a story that proved love cannot be disconnected. The neighbor carried that story with him for years. He would share it whenever someone felt alone in grief, and each time it healed a little piece of his own heart, because he, too, had once lost someone he loved deeply. But he never had the courage to hold onto their voice. The old man taught him the courage of remembering. One day, the neighbor looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you for letting me be part of your story. Your love will never be forgotten by the world." In his quiet apartment, the device still remained. Sometimes it was silent, sometimes it played softly, but it always carried the weight of eternity. The old man's chair stayed by the phone forever, untouched, waiting, as if he might return one day. But everyone knew he had already found peace. The silent phone was no longer silent at all. It echoed in hearts, in memories, in whispered prayers. It lived in every person who heard his story. Children, too, began asking their parents to record messages. They wanted to save those voices for the future, because now they understood how precious they were. The old man's grief had unknowingly created a movement of remembering, preserving, cherishing voices, a movement stronger than technology or time. Years later, the neighbor grew himself, but he still kept the recording safe and close, because it wasn't just Mary's voice, it was a legacy. He sometimes played it for his grandchildren. They would ask, "Who is this lady, Grandpa?" And he would smile softly, telling them the story. He told them about love that outlives death, about devotion that never bends or breaks, about a man who refused to let silence win. The children listened wide-eyed, holding back tears. Even at a young age, they could feel the truth. The story was bigger than time, bigger than loss. Every story we tell keeps someone alive a little longer. Every voice saved becomes a bridge across generations. That was the hidden gift inside the silent phone. The neighbor grew frail, but he never let go of hope. He believed one day he'd meet the old man again, and he'd thank him for teaching the world love. He wrote the story down so it would never vanish. He wanted future generations to know what it meant, to call a phone that never answered, yet spoke louder than life. On his final days, he played the recording one last time. Mary's words drifted through the room like a prayer, and he felt the presence of both her and the old man. He whispered softly, "I'll carry your story with me. May it live longer than both of us combined." And he closed his eyes with peace in his heart. The story spread to books, to films, to whispers online. Millions heard it and found a piece of themselves in it. Because everyone knows what it feels like to lose. But more importantly, everyone knows what it means to love. Love so deep it reaches across silence and time. Love so strong it can never be erased. The silent phone will never ring again, but its message will echo for eternity. It tells us love does not need an answer to exist. It only needs memory, devotion, and courage to hold on. It only needs hearts willing to keep it alive. It only needs the power of a single voice. So, if you're listening now, remember this truth. Don't wait until silence teaches you its painful lesson. Cherish the voices you still have around you. Record them, listen to them, hold them close always. Because one day, the call will not go through, and all that's left will be silence or memory. But silence can be turned into something greater. If you choose to honor love instead of fear, if you choose to carry their voice inside forever. The old man never knew his story would spread this far, but his devotion became a gift to countless strangers, a reminder that silence can also speak volumes. And so, the silent phone keeps ringing inside our hearts, not with sound, but with lessons carved in memory, lessons about love, grief, and the echoes that never die.